My husband won a Chanel bag in an office lucky draw, gave it to his female colleague, and says I'm overreacting over a bag. I still remember the exact expression on my husband's face when he walked through the front door that Friday evening. He looked excited. Not the usual I had a good day at work, kind of excited. More like someone who had won the lottery. He held up a sleek black shopping bag with a huge grin. Babe, guess what? I won the grand prize at the office lucky draw. I laughed and hugged him. No way, what did you win? He slowly pulled out a white dust bag with bold black lettering when he opened it. My jaw literally dropped. Inside was a gorgeous black Chanel classic flap bag. Even though I'm not obsessed with designer brands, I knew exactly what it was. It looked elegant, timeless, and incredibly expensive. I stared at him. Are you serious? He nodded proudly. Company invited luxury sponsors for our annual celebration. They had different prizes. Somehow I won the grand prize. I couldn't stop smiling, not because I expected him to hand it to me, but because it felt like such a lucky moment for us. We've been married for 4 years. Neither of us came from wealthy families. Buying something like that had always been impossible. It felt like life had randomly given us something special. I joked. Guess I finally own something designer. He laughed. Technically, yes. We spent the next hour taking pictures of the bag. I even teased him. You better not sell it. He smiled. We'll decide what to do together. That sentence stuck with me. We'll decide together because that's what married couples do, or at least, that's what I believed. The next morning, I noticed something strange. The Chanel bag wasn't on the dining table anymore. I assumed he'd put it somewhere safe when I asked where it was. He barely looked up from his phone. Oh, I gave it away. I actually laughed. What? I gave it to someone. I thought he meant his mother, maybe his sister, someone in the family. Instead, he casually said, I gave it to Emily. I blinked. Emily, my coworker. I honestly thought he was joking. What do you mean you gave it to your coworker? He shrugged. She really liked it. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It never came. Gave a Chanel bag worth thousands to another woman, he sighed dramatically. It's just a bag. I felt my stomach drop. Just a bag. You literally told me we'd decide together. He rolled his eyes. I won it. Technically, it's mine. I couldn't believe the conversation we were having. I never demanded the bag. I just thought something that valuable should be discussed. Instead of understanding, he became irritated. You always make everything into a problem. It's not like I cheated. That sentence hit me strangely because I hadn't mentioned cheating not once. Over the next week, Emily's name kept popping up. Before this, I'd barely heard about her. Suddenly, she was everywhere. Emily covered my meeting. Emily stayed late. Emily says the boss is impossible. Emily thinks the cafeteria food is terrible. It became impossible not to notice. One evening I asked casually, so, this Emily? What department is she in? He answered immediately, marketing. Then he smiled. She's hilarious. That smile bothered me, not because married people can't have friends, they absolutely can, but because he suddenly had endless compliments for someone I'd never even met. Meanwhile, every conversation between us felt shorter, colder, more impatient. A few days later, my friend sent me a screenshot. Isn't this your husband's office? It was an Instagram story. Someone from his company had posted photos from after-work drinks. There was my husband, standing beside Emily. She was carrying the Chanel bag. My husband's Chanel bag. No, the bag he had promised we'd decide on together. It tagged him, the caption said, luckiest girl ever. I felt sick, not because she had the purse, because of the way they were standing, too close, too comfortable, like everyone around them already saw them as a pair. That night I asked him calmly. I saw the pictures. He barely reacted. So, you don't think that's inappropriate? He sighed loudly, acting jealous. I'm asking why another woman is walking around with a luxury gift from my husband. It wasn't a gift. Just gave it to her. I blinked. That's literally what a gift is. He laughed, being dramatic. It's a purse. Then he added the sentence that changed everything. If someone appreciates something more than you do, why shouldn't they have it? I couldn't even process it. So, your coworker appreciates expensive gifts from married men? He slammed his glass onto the counter. There you go. Always trying to make someone the villain. A week later, Emily finally contacted me herself. I had never spoken to her before. She found me on social media. Her first message simply read, "You seem insecure." I stared at my phone, thinking it had to be fake, then another message arrived. "It's embarrassing that you're fighting over a handbag," I replied once. "Why are you messaging me?" Her answer came almost instantly. "Because your husband is stressed. Says you keep making his life miserable." That sentence made my hands shake. Not only were they talking about me, he was discussing our marriage with her. I didn't argue. Simply blocked her, then I waited for my husband to come home. When he walked in, I placed my phone on the table. Your coworker contacted me. The first time all evening. He looked nervous. He looked at my phone for a second, then calmly pushed it back toward me. So, that one word made my heart sink. So, I repeated. Your coworker just messaged your wife to call her insecure, and that's your response. He shrugged like we were discussing the weather. I can't control what she does. I stared at him. But you can control how you respond to it. He let out an annoyed sigh, making this way bigger than it is. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I didn't text her. I didn't insult her. Came looking for me. He folded his arms. Maybe because you keep posting passive-aggressive things online. I frowned. I haven't posted anything. He froze for half a second before quickly changing the subject. Whatever. This conversation is exhausting. That tiny pause didn't escape me. How did Emily know what I was supposedly posting if I hadn't posted anything unless? She was hearing everything directly from him after that night. I stopped arguing. Not because everything was fine, because I wanted to see what happened when I simply observed. Sometimes silence tells you more than questions ever will. And it didn't take long. His habits started changing. He began locking his phone even when he walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. He flipped it face down whenever a notification came in. He started taking urgent work calls outside. When I'd ask who it was, he'd simply say, "Office." No names, just, "Office." Came our wedding anniversary, 4 years. I booked dinner at the same little restaurant where we'd celebrated our first anniversary. I even took the afternoon off work. I wore the blue dress he once told me was his favorite at 6 o'clock. I texted him, "Leaving soon." No reply. 6:30, nothing. 7, still nothing. At 7:20, my phone finally buzzed. "Sorry, emergency meeting." No apology beyond that, no call, no offer to reschedule, just emergency meeting. I sat there alone for another 30 minutes before asking for the bill and leaving. Halfway home, my friend called. "Are you and your husband okay?" I frowned. "Why?" There was a long pause. "I don't know if I should tell you this." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" "I just saw him." New rooftop cafe downtown. I tried to convince myself there had to be a business event there, then she quietly added, "He wasn't alone." She sent me a picture. It wasn't blurry. It wasn't taken from far away. There was my husband, laughing. Across the table sat Emily. The Chanel bag rested on the chair beside her. They looked comfortable, not like coworkers discussing deadlines. Like two people enjoying a date. I zoomed in. She was wearing his jacket, the same gray jacket I'd bought him for his birthday. I didn't cry, not yet. I just kept staring until the screen blurred. When he came home close to midnight, I was sitting on the couch. The house was completely silent. He looked surprised to see me awake. "I thought you'd be asleep." I was waiting. He loosened his tie. "I already told you, emergency meeting." I quietly held up my phone. His face changed the second he saw the photo. He didn't ask where I got it. He didn't deny it. Instead, he said, "You had someone spying on me." I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because I couldn't believe that was his first concern. "I spent our anniversary alone." "You're worried about who took the picture." He rubbed his forehead. "Just grabbed dinner after work." I nodded slowly. "So your emergency meeting was dinner with Emily?" "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" He couldn't answer. The next morning, I woke up to over 20 notifications. Most were from people I didn't know. Confused, I opened one. "You should stop embarrassing yourself." Another read, "If your husband is happier with someone else, let him go." Then another, "Maybe work on your personality instead of blaming other women." I felt my chest tight. How were strangers suddenly messaging me? Then I found the source. Emily had posted a series of vague social media stories. She never used my name, but she didn't have to. She wrote things like, "Some wives think a marriage certificate means ownership," and "Confidence scares insecure people." Her friends filled the comments agreeing with her. One even wrote, "If he chose you, that's all that matters." She replied with a smiling emoji. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was turning me into the villain while pretending she was the victim. I showed everything to my husband. "Are you finally going to tell her to stop?" He barely looked at the screen. "I can't control the internet." I stared at him in disbelief. "So you're okay with your coworker encouraging people to harass your wife?" He sighed. "Maybe if you ignored it, it'd go away." That was the moment something inside me changed. I realized I was the only person trying to protect this marriage. He wasn't protecting me. He wasn't protecting our relationship. In fact, he seemed more concerned about protecting Emily. And once I accepted that truth, I stopped asking him to choose, because I had already started wondering whether my next step should be choosing myself. The next few days were strangely quiet. No arguments, no accusations, no raised voices. We barely spoke unless it was about bills or groceries. To anyone looking in from the outside, it probably seemed like things had settled down. But the silence wasn't peace. It was distance. The kind of distance that grows when one person has already started checking out of the relationship. I stopped asking where he was, stopped asking who he was texting, stopped reminding him about the promises he'd made, not because I'd stopped caring, because I was tired of being told I was imagining things. Instead, I started paying attention. When someone keeps insisting nothing is wrong, eventually the truth slips out on its own. One Saturday morning, he said he had to go into the office. Weekend audit, he explained while grabbing his keys. I simply nodded. Okay. He looked almost disappointed that I didn't question him. As soon as he left, I made myself coffee and started cleaning. About an hour later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Woman's voice answered. Hi, I'm sorry to bother you. She introduced herself as someone who worked in the same building as my husband, not his department, a different company on another floor. She sounded nervous. I hope I'm not crossing a line, but I think you deserve to know. My heart started racing. She explained that she'd recognized me from the photos my husband used to keep on his desk. Then she quietly said, I don't think your husband went to the office today. I gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean? The office is closed for maintenance this weekend. I felt my stomach drop. Closed, there was no audit, no meeting, nothing. Before hanging up, she added one more sentence. Seen him and that coworker together outside work several times. I just couldn't keep pretending I hadn't. I thanked her. She never asked for anything in return. She simply said, I'd want someone to tell me. When my husband came home that evening, I didn't mention the phone call. Instead, I asked casually, how was the audit? Without missing a beat, he answered, long. What did you work on? He started listing reports and spreadsheets, details, specifics, completely made up. He looked me straight in the eyes while lying. That hurt more than anything. A few days later, I received another message, this time from Emily. I'd blocked her before. Apparently, she'd created another account. The message read, you really need to stop checking up on him. It's unhealthy. I hadn't contacted her. I hadn't mentioned her, so how did she know I'd asked him about work unless? He was telling her everything. Again, I ignored the message. A minute later, another one came through. You can't force someone to stay where they're unhappy. Then another. Maybe if you were more supportive, he wouldn't need someone else to talk to. I read every word once. Then I took screenshots, blocked the account, and saved everything to a folder. For the first time, I wasn't collecting evidence to convince him. I was collecting it for myself. That weekend. My younger sister came over. She took one look at me and asked, when was the last time you smiled? I tried to laugh it off. I'm fine. She didn't buy it. After I'd told her everything, she stayed quiet for a long time. Then she asked one simple question. If your best friend told you this story, what advice would you give her? I didn't answer. Because I already knew that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I thought about the woman I'd been when we got married. Confident, hopeful, certain that we'd always have each other's backs. Somewhere along the way, I'd become someone who apologized for asking basic questions. Someone who felt guilty for expecting honesty. That wasn't the marriage I'd signed up for. The final straw came the following Friday. My husband forgot his smartwatch on the bathroom counter. A notification lit up. I wasn't trying to snoop. It appeared on the screen before I could even look away. The preview read, Emily. Don't forget tomorrow. I can't wait. Read just one line, no context, no explanation, just enough to make my chest tight. I didn't touch the watch. I didn't open any messages. I simply put it back exactly where I'd found it. When he realized he'd left it behind, he rushed home to get it. The first thing he did was check the watch. Then he looked at me. You didn't read anything, did you? I calmly replied, no. He looked relieved, not because he'd been honest, because he thought he hadn't been caught. That's when I realized something. A person with nothing to hide doesn't panic over a notification. The next morning, he got dressed unusually early. New shirt, fresh haircut, the expensive cologne he rarely wore. As he headed toward the door, I asked, big meeting today. He hesitated. Yeah, I smiled politely. Have a good day. He left. 5 minutes later. I quietly opened my laptop, not to follow him. Not to confront him, but to start looking for a divorce lawyer, because whether he admitted the truth or not, I had finally accepted it. A few hours later, I sat across from a divorce lawyer for the first time in my life. I never imagined I'd be there. When I got married, I thought divorce was something that happened to other people, not us. The lawyer listened patiently while I explained everything, the luxury bag, the lies, the messages, the public posts. The constant dismissal whenever I tried to talk about it. When I finished, she folded her hands and said gently, "You don't have to prove that your marriage was perfect. You only need to decide whether it's still healthy for you." That sentence stayed with me. For weeks, I'd been trying to prove I wasn't overreacting. But maybe that wasn't the point anymore. Over the next several days, I quietly gathered the documents I needed: bank statements, our lease agreement, insurance papers, copies of important records. I wasn't doing it out of revenge. I was preparing in case I decided to move forward. For the first time in months, I felt like I was making decisions instead of just reacting. Meanwhile, Emily seemed to become even bolder. She started posting photos from restaurants, concerts, and cafes. She never tagged my husband directly, but little details kept standing out: his favorite watch sitting across the table, his unmistakable jacket draped over a chair, a coffee mug with his initials, always just enough to make people wonder. And every time someone commented, "Are you dating someone?" she'd reply with a winking emoji. It felt deliberate, like she enjoyed keeping everyone guessing. One evening, my husband came home unusually cheerful. "Got some good news," he announced. "Our department is having a weekend retreat." I nodded. "Sounds fun. We'll be gone overnight. Company paid." I smiled politely. "I hope you have a good trip." He looked surprised. "You don't have any questions?" "No." He studied my face for a moment, almost as if he was waiting for me to argue. When I didn't, he walked away. The next morning, after he'd left, my phone buzzed. It was a message request from someone I didn't recognize. The profile belonged to another employee at his company. The message was short: "Don't want to get involved, but I think you should know there isn't any company retreat this weekend." I read it 3 times, then a second message arrived. "Several of us are uncomfortable with what's been happening. People in the office have been talking for months." Months. That word hit me the hardest. Not days, not weeks. Months. I thanked the person for reaching out. I didn't ask for gossip. I didn't ask for proof. At that point, I already knew enough. Trust isn't only broken by one dramatic moment. Sometimes it's broken by 100 small choices. When Sunday evening came, my husband returned home carrying an overnight bag. He smiled as if nothing had happened. Retreat was exhausting. I simply looked at him. "What was the hotel called?" He hesitated, then named one. I quietly nodded. "Interesting." He frowned. "I called that hotel this afternoon to ask about a booking." His face lost all color. "They said your company never had a group reservation." Room went completely silent. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "You called the hotel?" "I did." He let out a frustrated laugh. "So now you're investigating me?" I stared at him in disbelief. "I just caught you lying." "Your concern is that I checked your story?" He rubbed his temples. "Become impossible to live with." I took a slow breath. "No, I became impossible to fool." He grabbed his keys. "I need some air." As he walked toward the door, I said one last thing. "You don't have to keep lying." He stopped, his back still facing me. "I already know this marriage is over." The first time, he didn't deny it. He didn't argue. He didn't even turn around. He simply walked out the door. I stood there listening to his footsteps fade away. Oddly enough, I didn't cry, because the hardest part had already happened. I'd spent months mourning a marriage that only one of us had been fighting for. Now all that was left was making it official. A week passed. He never apologized, not once. Instead, he acted as though we were simply roommates sharing the same house. He came and went without explanation. Sometimes he didn't come home until after midnight. If I asked whether he'd eaten dinner, he'd answer with one word: "Yeah." That was it. No conversation, no effort, no sign that he cared. We were falling apart. My lawyer called to let me know the divorce papers were ready. She asked one simple question: "Are you certain you want to proceed?" I looked around the living room. Our wedding photos were still hanging on the wall. Our honeymoon souvenirs were still on the shelf. Everything looked exactly the same. Except the marriage those things represented no longer existed. I answered quietly, "Yes." I decided to wait until the weekend to tell him. I wanted the conversation to happen when neither of us had to rush to work. Saturday morning, he was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone. I placed an envelope in front of him. "What's this?" "Please read it." He opened it casually. The moment he realized what it was, his expression changed. Looked up at me in disbelief. "Actually serious?" I nodded. "I am." He leaned back in his chair and laughed, not because he found it funny, because he didn't believe I'd go through with it. "This is ridiculous. You're ending a marriage over a handbag." There it was again, the handbag, as if that had ever been the real issue. I looked him in the eye. "I'm ending this marriage because you lied. You dismissed my concerns. You let another woman disrespect me. Every time I asked for honesty, you told me I was overreacting. The bag was never the problem. It was the choices you made after it. The first time in months. He had no sarcastic response later. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. Another message request, this time from Emily. It read, "So he told me you filed for divorce." I didn't respond. A second message came through. "Honestly, you're doing us both a favor." Then another. "He deserves someone who trusts him." I stared at the screen for a moment. Then instead of replying, I took screenshots and blocked the account. Again, I realized something. She kept trying to provoke me because she wanted a reaction. She wanted me to lose my temper. She wanted to paint me as the crazy wife. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction that evening. My husband came into the living room. He looked frustrated. "Did you tell people we're getting divorced?" I frowned. "No." "Then why are people at work asking me about it?" I almost laughed. "I haven't spoken to anyone at your office." He rubbed the back of his neck. "They're all acting weird." A brief second, I wondered if people had finally started putting the pieces together themselves. Maybe they had noticed how close he and Emily had become. Maybe the rumors had been circulating long before I ever knew. Whatever the reason, I wasn't interested in finding out. Their workplace gossip wasn't my responsibility. A few days later, I started packing my belongings. Not dramatically. Not in anger, one box at a time, books, clothes, family photos, things that actually belonged to me. As I wrapped one of our wedding picture frames in newspaper, he walked into the room. He stood there quietly, then asked, "Are you really leaving?" I paused. "Yes." He looked around the room. "You'll regret this." I shook my head. I already regret staying as long as I did. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to argue, but nothing came out because deep down, he knew exactly how we'd ended up here, not because of a luxury handbag, not because I asked questions, but because every time our marriage needed honesty, he chose someone else. The day I moved out was surprisingly ordinary. No dramatic shouting, no one throwing things, no last-minute confession. Just cardboard boxes, packing tape, and silence. My sister helped load the last few boxes into her car. Before I left, I took one final look around the apartment. It had been our home for 4 years. Now it just felt like a place full of memories that no longer belonged to me. As I reached for the front door, my husband spoke. "You don't have to do this." I turned around. For a split second, I wondered if this was finally going to be the apology I'd waited months to hear. Instead, he said, "We can tell everyone we just needed some space." I stared at him. "You still care more about what people think than what actually happened." He didn't answer. I walked out. The next few weeks were quiet, painfully quiet. I moved into a small apartment. It wasn't fancy. The furniture didn't match. The kitchen was tiny. But for the first time in a long time, I felt peaceful. No one was calling me dramatic. No one was making me question my own instincts. I started sleeping through the night again. It amazed me how much lighter life felt when I wasn't constantly wondering whether I was being lied to. The divorce process officially began. Our communication was limited to practical matters, bills, documents, appointments, nothing more. One afternoon, while sorting through paperwork, I realized he'd never once asked me how I was doing. Not once. He hadn't asked if I'd found a place to live. He hadn't asked if I needed help moving. He hadn't asked if I was okay. That realization hurt, not because I expected him to fix everything, but because it confirmed something I'd been avoiding. He had emotionally checked out long before I filed for divorce. A month later, I ran into one of his former coworkers at the grocery store. She recognized me immediately. She looked hesitant. "I hope you're doing okay." I smiled politely. "I'm getting there," she sighed. Wanted to apologize. I frowned. "What?" She looked genuinely uncomfortable. "A lot of us saw what was happening. People in the office noticed how close they were. Assumed he'd eventually tell you." My heart sank. "So, everyone knew," she nodded slowly. "Every detail. Enough that people were talking." She paused before adding, "I don't think anyone expected it to end this way." Neither did I. A few weeks after that, I heard something I never expected. Emily had started working in another company. Apparently, she'd resigned not long after my husband and I separated. I didn't know why, and honestly, it didn't matter. Their careers were no longer my concern. I wasn't interested in keeping track of either of them. One rainy afternoon, my phone rang. His name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. It was quiet for several seconds. Then he asked, "How have you been?" I almost smiled. It was the first time he'd asked me that in months. "I'm doing well." Another long silence. Then he quietly said, "Been thinking." I waited. "I made a lot of mistakes." Those were words I'd once dreamed of hearing. Months earlier, I would have cried. Months earlier, I would have begged for this conversation. But now, it felt different because apologies mean very little after someone repeatedly chooses not to change. I replied calmly, I hope you've learned from them." He sounded surprised. "That's all you're going to say?" I looked out the window as the rain tapped softly against the glass. "What else is there to say?" He didn't answer. After a few awkward seconds, he quietly said goodbye. That was the last conversation we ever had. A few months later, our divorce was finalized. I walked out of the courthouse holding a single folder. No celebration, no tears, just relief. As I stepped outside, my sister wrapped me in a hug. She smiled and asked, "So, what's next?" I looked up at the clear sky and smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. Whatever comes next. I know one thing. Never stay in a relationship where someone convinces me that disrespect is something I should simply tolerate. Because the truth was, this story was never about a Chanel bag. It was about broken trust, about choosing honesty over comfort, and about finally realizing that loving yourself sometimes means having the courage to walk away from someone who stopped valuing you long ago.